Silas Vane didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in things he could touch, things he could skin, and things he could bury. Up here in the high, jagged teeth of the Montana Territory, the only thing that haunted a man was hunger and the wind. Before we will continue and know what Silas got for us in this beautiful story, I need to take a few minutes of your time and hit that subscribe button and share this story to the people you think really need to read it. If you have done that, thank you so much, folks. Now let's begin. Silas was a man made of hard angles and scar tissue. At 52, his hands were the color of cured tobacco and twice as tough. He lived in a cabin built of black timber, perched on the edge of a valley they called the Devil's Throat. It was a lonely place, a place where the sun forgot to shine for 3 months out of the year, leaving nothing but a world of white frost and blue shadows. He had spent 20 years in silence. No wife, no kin, just a dog that had died 5 winters back, and a Winchester rifle that never left his side. He liked the silence. It didn't ask questions. It didn't remind him of the war or the blood he'd spilled in the name of a flag that didn't know his name. But that Tuesday, the silence broke. The storm was a whiteout, a screaming wall of ice that turned the world into a blind man's nightmare. Silas was battening down the shutters when he saw it. A shape, small, stumbling. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a wolf. It was a woman. She came out of the swirling, white like a dream born of fever. She wasn't wearing a coat. No boots. Just a thin, tattered dress of gray cotton that clung to her frame like a second skin. Her hair was black as a crow's wing, matted with ice. She didn't scream. She didn't call out. She just stopped 10 yards from his porch and looked at him. Her eyes, they weren't the eyes of someone freezing to death. They were hollow, deep, like 2 empty wells in the middle of a desert. Silas didn't hesitate. A man doesn't survive the frontier by overthinking. He stepped into the gale, grabbed her by the arm, and practically carried her inside. The first thing he noticed was the weight, or the lack of it. She felt like she was made of dried corn husks and old memories. He slammed the door against the wind and bolted it. The cabin was warm, the stove glowing a dull, comforting red, but the woman, she just stood there, water pooled at her bare feet. She didn't shiver. Not once. "Sit," Silas commanded, his voice like gravel grinding on stone. It was the first time he'd spoken in 3 days. She didn't move. She just stared at the floorboards. "You're lucky," he muttered, reaching for a wool blanket. 5 more minutes out there, and the mountain would have claimed you. You'd be nothing but a statue of ice until the spring thaws. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. As his fingers brushed the nape of her neck, a jolt went through him. It wasn't a spark of heat. It was the opposite. It was a cold so deep, so absolute, it felt like his own blood had turned to slush for a heartbeat. He pulled back, his brow furrowed. "What's your name, girl?" She looked up then. A slow, rhythmic movement. Her lips were blue. Not the blue of a cold snap, but the blue of a bruise that never fades. "Elias," she whispered. Silas froze. "My name is Silas." "Who's Elias?" She didn't answer. She just looked back down at the floor, right at the spot where the rug didn't quite cover the heavy iron rings of the cellar door. The storm raged for 2 days. At that time, the woman, who eventually whispered that her name was Cora, hardly spoke. Silas did what he knew how to do. He kept the fire roaring. He boiled coffee until it was thick as mud. He fried salt pork and offered it to her. But Cora didn't eat. She'd sit by the stove, wrapped in 3 blankets, her eyes always fixed on the floorboards. "You gotta eat, Cora," Silas said on the second night. "Strength is the only thing that keeps you upright out here. You're thin enough to blow away in a light breeze." "I'm not hungry, Silas," she said. Her voice was steady. Too steady. No tremor of the lungs. No rattle of the chest. He watched her from his chair across the room, his shotgun resting across his knees. He was an observant man. He had to be. He noticed that the frost on the windows didn't melt when she stood near them. He noticed that his dog's old collar, hanging on a peg near her head, would sway when she breathed, even though there was no draft. But mostly he noticed the smell. It wasn't the smell of a woman. It wasn't perfume or sweat or wood smoke. It was a smell he hadn't encountered since the war. The smell of wet earth, of old iron, of things that had been kept in the dark for a long, long time. "Where'd you come from?" he asked, his voice low. "There ain't a ranch for 40 miles. No wagons passed this way since the pass choked with snow." Cora looked at him. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I've been here a long time, Silas. Long before you built this cabin. Long before you decided to hide from the world." Silas felt a prickle of unease. He'd built this place himself 15 years ago. He'd cleared the timber. He'd dug the foundation. "You're talking in riddles," he grunted. "The cold does that to the mind. Plays tricks. Makes the past feel like the present." "The past never leaves," she said. "It just sinks, like a stone in a pond. It's still there at the bottom, waiting for someone to dive deep enough to touch it." That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. Cora was on the small bed in the corner, silent. The storm had died down to a low moan, but the cabin felt heavier, like the air itself was getting thicker. He heard a sound, a faint, rhythmic scratching. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from beneath him, from the cellar. He sat up, his heart thudding like a hammer against a rail. He looked over at Cora. She was sitting up, too. Her eyes were glowing in the dying embers of the fire, not with light, but with a strange silver reflection. "Do you hear them?" she asked. "Hear what?" "It's just the timber settling. The frost is expanding in the ground." "No," Cora said. She stood up, the blankets falling from her shoulders like shed skin. She walked toward his bed. Her movements were fluid, silent. "It's the others. They're wondering why you're so warm. They're wondering why you get to breathe when the rest of us have forgotten how." She reached out a hand. Silas didn't pull away. He was a brave man, but he was also a curious one. He wanted to know. Her hand touched his cheek. Silas gasped. It wasn't like touching ice. Ice is a sting. This was a void. It was as if the heat was being sucked out of his soul, pulled into her fingertips like water into a sponge. "Cora," he choked out. "Your skin. Why is it so cold?" She didn't answer. She just leaned in, her face inches from his. "Pull back the covers, Silas," she whispered. "Look at what you're sleeping on." "Before we see what was hidden beneath that cabin floor, I want to ask you something. We all have things we buried, choices we made that we hope the snow will cover forever." Silas Vane thought he could build a life on top of silence. He thought if he went high enough, the world wouldn't be able to reach him. But the West doesn't forget. The land has a memory longer than any man's life. If you're enjoying this journey into the dark corners of the frontier, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button and give this story a like. It helps us keep these fires burning. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt a cold that didn't come from the weather? A chill that started in your bones because you knew something wasn't right? Let's get back to the devil's throat. Silas is about to find out that his sanctuary was never a home. It was a lid. Silas lunged for his lantern. His hands shook, a thing they hadn't done since the day he stood on the ridge at Antietam. He struck a match, the sulphurous smell stinging his nose, and lit the wick. The yellow light flooded the room. Cora was gone. The bed in the corner was empty. The blankets were piled on the floor, but they weren't wet anymore. They were covered in a fine, gray dust. "Cora," he called out. Silence. He looked at the cellar door. The iron rings were vibrating. Not much, just a tiny, frantic shiver. Silas grabbed his crowbar. He didn't want to open it. Every instinct he had, the instincts that had kept him alive through wars and winters, told him to run, to walk out into the snow and never look back. But a man like Silas doesn't run from his own house. He hooked the bar under the lip of the door and heaved. The wood groaned, a sound like a dying animal. The door flew back, slamming against the floor. Silas held the lantern over the dark square of the cellar. He expected to see his crates of salt pork, his barrels of flour, his jugs of cider. He saw none of that. The cellar was empty of food, but it was full of something else. The lantern light hit the far wall. There, stacked like cordwood, were bones. Not animal bones. These were small, delicate, rib cages like bird cages. skulls of the hair, still clinging to them in patches of rotted brown and gray. Silas backed away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No, I dug this hole. I dug it myself. There was nothing but dirt and stone. You didn't dig deep enough, a voice said. He turned. Cora was standing by the window. The moonlight was hitting her now, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. The gray dress wasn't gray cotton. It was a burial shroud. It was tattered and stained with the minerals of the earth. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent. He could see the dark, frozen lines of her veins beneath the surface. "This valley," she said, her voice echoing as if she were speaking from inside a cave. "In 49, a wagon train got lost. The Donner Party wasn't the only one the mountains ate. Silas. There were 40 of us. We huddled in a cave just below where this cabin stands. We waited for spring. We waited for help." She took a step toward him. But the men, the ones in charge, they didn't want to wait. They decided that if we were going to die anyway, we might as well serve a purpose. They killed the weak first. The children, they used us to stay warm, to stay fed. Silas felt a sick realization wash over him. He remembered finding a strange, rusted locket when he'd first cleared this land. He'd tossed it aside, thinking it was just trash from a passing traveler. The man who led them, Cora whispered, his name was Silas Vane. Your grandfather, Silas. Silas froze. His grandfather had been a pioneer, a hero of the family stories, the man who had conquered the pass. He didn't conquer anything, Cora said. He was murdered, and when he finally made it out, he used the gold he took from our pockets to buy the land. He told his sons to never come back here. But you had his blood. You had his eyes. The land called you back to the scene of the crime. The scratching sound grew louder. Silas looked back at the cellar. Hands, white, skeletal hands, were reaching over the lip of the door. 1, 10, 20. The others weren't just a metaphor. The cabin began to shake, not from the wind, but from the ground up. They want their warmth back, Silas, Cora said. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was a mask of cold fury. They've been down there in the dark for 60 years. They're so very cold. Silas grabbed his Winchester. Get back. I don't care who your people are. This is my house. I built it with my own sweat. With his money, she countered. The first figure emerged from the cellar. It was a small thing, a child, or what was left of one. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. Its jaw hung loose, and its eyes were nothing but points of blue fire. Then another, a woman with a hole in her temple. A man with his throat carved open. Silas fired. The bullet tore through the child thing's chest, but it didn't stop. There was no blood to spill, no organs to fail. It just kept coming. He backed toward the door, but the wood had turned to ice. The handle was frozen shut. You can't shoot a debt, Silas, Cora said. She was standing right in front of him now. The lantern on the table flickered and died, leaving only the silver moonlight and the blue fire of the dead. Silas dropped the rifle. He knew when a fight was over. He'd seen enough death to recognize its face. He looked at Cora. What do you want? The truth, she said, and a place in the sun. Silas looked at the reaching hands. He looked at the hollow eyes of the people his kin had butchered to survive. He thought about the 15 years he'd spent up here, thinking he was a self-made man. He thought about the silence he'd loved so much. It wasn't silence. It was a muffled scream. He reached out and grabbed the iron rings of the cellar door. With a roar of effort, he didn't try to close it. He ripped it off its hinges and threw it into the fireplace. The dry wood caught. The iron began to glow. If you want the warmth, Silas yelled, his voice breaking, take it. He grabbed the burning logs with his bare hands, ignoring the sear of his flesh. He began to throw the fire into the cellar. He threw the embers onto the stacks of bones. He kicked the stove over, letting the red-hot coals spill across the floorboards. Silas! Cora cried out. This house is built on a lie, he screamed. Let it burn. Let the mountain see what's been hiding in its throat. The fire took hold fast. The old pine was like tinder. In seconds, The cabin was a chimney of orange flame. The dead didn't scream. They didn't run. They stood in the fire, their translucent forms soaking up the heat. Silas stood in the center of the room. He felt the skin on his face blister. He felt his lungs fill with the heavy, sweet smoke of his own destruction. Cora walked into the flames. She didn't burn. She seemed to grow brighter, more solid. The blue in her lips turned to red. The hollows in her eyes filled with life. She reached out and touched his chest. This time, her hand wasn't cold. It was warm, like a summer breeze off the prairie. "You pay the debt, Silas," she whispered. Then the roof buckled. When the spring thaw finally came to the devil's throat, the Rangers found nothing but a rectangle of blackened stone. The cabin was gone. There were no remains found in the ashes. No bones. No buckles. Nothing but a single rusted locket sitting on top of a pile of gray soot. Inside the locket was a picture of a young woman with black hair and a name engraved in the silver. Cora. The local folks say the valley feels different now. The Devil's Throat isn't so quiet anymore. In the summer, the grass grows thicker there than anywhere else in Montana. Wildflowers, the bright red kind, bloom in a perfect rectangle where a cabin once stood. Silas Vane was never seen again. Some say he died in that fire. Others say he's still out there, walking the high ridges, finally freed away of a name he never asked for. Because that's the thing about the West. It's a graveyard. Every mile of it is built on someone's struggle, someone's sacrifice, and sometimes someone's sin. You can build a house. You can build a town. You can even build a nation. But eventually, the ground is going to ask you what you did with the people you found there. And when that happens, no amount of silence will save you. If the story stayed with you, if it gave you a chill that the fire couldn't reach, then subscribe to our channel. We have many more tales from the Old West. Stories of grit, of ghosts, and of men and women who stood their ground when the world tried to take it. Before you go, pour yourself another cup of coffee. Look out your window. Is the wind just a wind? Or is it a memory trying to find its way back home? Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your hand on your heart. Out here, the stories never truly end. They just wait for the next traveler to come along. Safe travels.